I'm going to be describing some basic stances including parallel stance, sitting stance, walking stance and L stance. And I'll also describe some ready stances, including attention stance. So let's start with parallel stance, which is in Korean Narani Sogi. In parallel stance, the feet point forward so the feet are parallel, hence its name. Ensure that the toes are lined up in a straight line. The width of the stance should be about one shoulder width measured from the outside of the feet. This is a symmetrical stance, so the weight distribution is 50% on each leg. And because this stance is symmetrical, there is no left or right version of this stance. Both legs are kept straight and ensure that your body remains vertical so that the center of mass remains at the center of the stance. With this stance, the body can be considered as being full facing or side facing. Before moving on to the next stance, notice that we often describe the dimensions of a stance based on shoulder widths. Now, this is just an approximation, and it's based on the proportions of a person of average build. So, depending on your proportions, you may need to make adjustments. If, for example, you're shorter than average with very broad shoulders, you'll need to make your stance smaller than the prescribed shoulder width. And if, for example, you're taller than average with very narrow shoulders, you'll need to make the stance longer than the prescribed shoulder width. But for someone like me, I'd be considered a person of average proportion. I'm not sure I like the sound of that. For some reason it affects my ego. Anyway. Sitting stance in Korean is Anun Sogi. Like in parallel stance, the feet point forward so they remain parallel. Ensure that the toes line up in a straight line. The stance is 1.5 shoulder widths wide, measured from the inside of the big toes. This is also a symmetrical stance, so the weight distribution is 50% on each leg, and again there is no left or right version of this stance. The knees are bent and extended outwards until the kneecaps are directly above the ball of the foot. Ensure that your body remains vertical, so the center of mass is directly above the center of the stance. The body can be considered as full facing or side facing. Walking stance in Korean is Gunan Sogi. The front foot points forward and the rear foot points outwards, but not by more than 25 degrees. The stance is 1.5 shoulder widths long, measured from the toes of the front foot to the toes of the rear foot. It is 1 shoulder width wide, measured from the middle of the instep of both feet. The weight distribution is 50% on each leg. The front leg should be bent so that the knee is directly above the heel. The rear leg should be completely straight and the body should be vertical. Since the weight distribution is 50% on each leg, it's the front leg that determines whether this stance is left or right. So when the left leg is in front, it is called a left walking stance, and when the right leg is in front, it's called a right walking stance. The body can be positioned full facing or half facing in this stance, but never side facing. L stance in Korean is Nyunja Sogi. The rear foot points out to the side to form an L shape, although the toes of both feet are turned in by about 15 degrees. The big toe of the front foot lines up with the heel of the rear foot. This means there will be a small gap of about 2.5 centimeters between the heels. The stance is 1.5 shoulder widths long, measured from the toes of the front foot to the foot sole of the rear foot, and the weight distribution is 70% on the rear leg and 30% on the front leg. Make sure that the knee of the rear leg is directly above the toes and the hip is aligned with the inner knee joint. The knee of the front leg lines up with the heel of the front foot, and the body is kept vertical. As there is more weight on the rear leg, it's the rear leg that determines whether it's a left or right L stance. So when the right leg is at the rear, it's called a right L stance, and when the left leg is at the rear, it's called a left L stance. The body is always half facing in this stance. It can never be full facing or side facing. A ready stance, Junbi Sogi, of which there are many, are used as ready postures before fundamental exercises or patterns, but they're not used for executing actual techniques. To form a parallel ready stance, Narani Junbi Sogi, place your fists in front of the lower part of your abdomen. The distance between the fists is 5 centimeters and the fists are 7 centimeters from the abdomen. The distance between the elbows and the floating ribs should be about 10 centimeters. The upper arms are brought forward by about 30 degrees and the elbows are bent upward by about 40 degrees. This stance is used as a ready posture for many patterns including Chonji-to, Dangun-to, Dosan-to. To form a walking ready stance, Gunun Chumbi Sogi, place the fists to the side and the elbows should be bent about 30 degrees. Now in the Taekwondo Encyclopedia, it says the distance between the fists and the thighs should be about 30 centimeters. This is assuming that the person is an adult of average proportion. 30 centimeters would not be appropriate for a small child. It would need to be less than that. In any case, to make sure that the fists are roughly in the right place, make sure that they don't end up above the umbilicus and not below the lower abdomen. To form a sitting ready stance, Anun Chumbi Sogi, adopt a sitting stance and place the arms exactly like a walking ready stance, where the elbows are bent 30 degrees. And to form an L ready stance, Nyunja Chumbi Sogi, you also bend the elbows 30 degrees, but in this case your body is half facing. The attention stance, Chariot Sogi, is classed as a ready stance, but it is unique in that it only exists as a ready stance. That's why it's not called an attention ready stance, as it cannot be otherwise. It is used for the bow posture and for being in an attentive position before and after an exercise. To form an attention stance, the heels are kept together and the feet point outward to form a 45-degree angle. The body is kept vertically upright and allow your arms to hang to the side. Bend your elbows very slightly forward and outwards. To form the bow posture, bend your body 15 degrees forward and keep your eyes looking at the opponent. So look out for my next video where I'll describe some more stances that a 6th cup green belt up to a 1st cup black tag should know. And if you want to keep up with my latest video releases, make sure you subscribe.